This happened over a decade ago, somewhere in northern Michigan during the summer. My friend Kathy, who was 18, my boyfriend's half-sister May, 16, and myself, who was 17, drove from our hometown to visit friends. We were on our way back home in Kathy's shitty little GM Geo. And by shitty, I mean this piece of junk had engine problems, overheating issues, ignition malfunctions, and was constantly falling apart. More than once, it had just stalled out or stopped working in the middle of the street while we were trying to get somewhere. But Kathy thought we would be fine, since there were no problems on the way to our friend's house. It was a bit past midnight, and we're roughly an hour away from home. There was nobody on the road, dense woods on either side, no streetlights and no moon. I could barely see past the windshield. I have a form of albinism, which leaves me legally blind in my left eye and with poor vision in my right. My depth perception is terrible, and I can't see more than a few feet ahead of me at most, but I can usually make out lights, other cars as they pass, and sometimes street signs or people when they're close enough. We drove up a hill on a narrow road, and during our descent down the other side, the Geo makes a strange sound. Kathy starts to brake. By the time we get to the bottom of the hill, the car sputters and dies. Kathy swears and turns on the hazard lights. She and I get out of the vehicle and pop the hood, which causes a plume of smoke to fly out. After the smoke clears, Kathy tries to figure out what went wrong this time. We stand there in the dark for at least 45 minutes, maybe longer, before we realized she couldn't fix the car, and we needed a tow truck. These are the days of MapQuest printouts and brick cell phones, so we couldn't just whip out our smartphones and look up the closest towing company. I decided to call my boyfriend Caleb. I figured he could come pick us up, and we would come back with our own tow to pick up the Geo when it was daylight. May and Kathy agreed, so I take out my Nokia and try to call my boyfriend. But we are still in the middle of nowhere. There was no service out here. I asked May and Kathy if either of them had cell service. They both shook their heads. May then begins to panic, and we all start holding our phones up, trying to get a signal, but to no avail. It was hot as fuck, and after failing to get any kind of service, we were all feeling a bit spooked and uncomfortable. May begs us to do something, and while Kathy was trying to calm her down, I start wondering if the thick forest and hills surrounding us are blocking our reception. You guys wait in the car. I'm gonna go see if I can get service. I walk up the hill we had just come down from, holding my phone out. Still no signal. So I walk further and further away until I reached the top. I couldn't see the outline of the car anymore, but I could still hear May in the distance. God, such a crybaby. Even at the top of the hill, I don't get a signal. I know it's gotta be these trees in the way, so I get the idea of climbing up a tree and calling from there, just to see if it worked. In hindsight, this was not the smartest idea, but it seemed like the only option. I saunter off into the woods in search of a tree I could climb. I locate a nice one with low-hanging branches and lift my body upward towards the trunk, then climb the branches higher and higher. I'm about midway up the tree when I feel my pack of cigarettes fall out of my shorts pocket. I'm kind of annoyed, but I figure I can just look for them when I climb back down. I take my phone out and hold it up once I get near the top. Finally, I have service. Relieved, I call Caleb, but he doesn't pick up at first, so I call him again until he does. He answers in an aggravated voice. Apparently, I had just woke him up, but I'm having none of it, and I simply explained the situation to him, and I gave him the name of the road and my best guess as to how far along we were on it. He said that he'll be on his way and tells me to go back and wait with May and Kathy, then badgers me for being stupid enough to climb a tree in the dark with my bad depth perception. I assure him that I'm fine, and we hang up. I start climbing back down, but my hand touches a big glob of sap. So I stop and try to wipe it off my shirt. I'm already sweaty and gross, so I'm not too happy about the sap. While I'm trying and failing to get rid of this crud on my hands, I hear a sound from somewhere below me. I completely froze as I heard someone running through the forest. I stare down into the darkness below me, but I can't see shit. I just hear the noise coming closer and closer, and then I hear it right below me. It stops directly under my tree. I hold onto the branches as tight as I could and just waited. I hear the leaves shuffling and twigs snapping, and after a while, the footsteps start up again, but now they are heading away from my position and deeper into the woods. I wait until I can no longer hear the sound before I finish climbing down and jump out of the tree. It's completely silent now, besides the natural soundscape of the forest, so I grope around on the ground for my fallen cigarettes, but I couldn't find them. So I make my way out of the woods and back to the road. I jog down the hill, and when I got to the bottom, I noticed that May and Kathy are not standing outside the car anymore, and the hazard lights are now off. I approach the car, and May rolls down the window just a bit and whispers in a panicked voice, "Elizabeth, where the hell were you?" I point back over my shoulder and started to explain that I called Caleb. "Get the fuck back in the car, now!" Kathy cuts in. I give them a weird look, but May unlocks and opens the door, and I crawl into the back seat with her, slamming the door behind me. One of the windows of the Geo has never closed all the way, but there is less than a finger space of room, so it's not too big of a deal. But May is freaking out about it, and Kathy has lost her cool as well. I was still confused and asked what was going on. May tells me shortly after I went up the hill, some guy emerged out of the forest and ran up the hill in the same direction I went. They freaked out, got in the car, turned the lights off, and locked the doors. They thought he had caught up to me. I'm honestly scared at this point, because if I hadn't stopped to wipe the sap off of my hands, I most likely would have gotten out of the tree at the same time I heard those footsteps. I just knew the person that they were talking about was the one I heard in the forest. I told them what had happened to me, and everybody in the car is now scared shitless, but are relieved that Caleb is on his way. We only have to play the waiting game now. We sat on the road for what seemed like forever. The dread we felt made time seem like it was going slower than normal. Kathy and May are looking out the windows, surveying the area, and I'm just sitting there hoping Caleb will hurry the fuck up. Suddenly I heard May say, "Oh my God," before bursting into tears. Kathy snaps her head to where May is looking and stifles a gasp. I look, but I can see nothing but dark. But then, I hear it through the small opening in the window. Footsteps. May ducks down, as if doing so would make her invisible, and Kathy hides her head behind the steering wheel. I follow their lead and sort of hunch down on my seat, but the noise comes straight up to my window. I can almost make out the silhouette of a tall, skinny man. He then presses his face against the window, and I finally see him. No one screams. You would think that we would, but it didn't happen. We all just kind of stare at each other as he looks in at us. Kathy switches on her brights, hoping that this would scare him off, but it did nothing. The man just walked to the front of the car and stood in front of the headlights. Maybe he thought he could block us from leaving? I'm not sure. I couldn't make out his features very well, but the guy had to have been somewhere a bit over 6 feet tall and no older than 30. He had the face of your average Joe, Nothing really sinister or creepy that you would notice about him if you ran into him in broad daylight. He had dark hair, pale skin, with a long face. May said he had light-colored eyes, and a stubble with eyebrows that made him look like he was always concerned, but there was no way that I could make that out, so I have to take her word for it. What was really bizarre was that it was about 80 degrees out, and the man was wearing a pair of corduroys and an oversized sweater with abnormally long sleeves. The sleeves went over his hands and flopped back and forth as he paced around in front of the Geo. I'm not sure how long he was in front of the car, but it was for a while. Then Corduroy starts doing something even more strange. He bends his arms up toward his face, which I can only describe as looking like a praying mantis because of the way his sleeves were hanging. Then he begins walking circles around the car, rhythmically taking 2 steps forward, then 1 step back, like Willy Wonka on speed. By now, May was losing her mind, and Kathy seemed like she had to vomit, so I felt like I had to be the brave one. I looked at the slight space in the window, and when he orbited his way over there, I said, "Hey man, can you just stop? You're really freaking us out." Corduroy definitely heard me. He came to a halt and looked back into the car, through the windshield, straight at me. I asked him firmly to leave, and he took an extended pause, smiled, then Willy Wonka'd his way out of my line of vision. After a while, Kathy said he disappeared into the forest. I can't believe that worked. We awkwardly laughed about it and went back to waiting for Caleb to show up, somewhat reassured, but still paranoid. After some time, Kathy said, "Oh no, guess who's back?" I couldn't see, but apparently Corduroy was doing his Willy Wonka walk parallel to us on the side of the road, and this time, he had a large tree branch in his sweater-covered hands. May got scared again, and I held her hand trying to calm her down, even though I was ready to shit myself. It was horrifying for me because I didn't know if he was coming toward us or if he was moving away. It was kind of like when you knew there was going to be a jump scare in a horror movie. Kathy let out a yelp as something smacked against the side of the car. Corduroy was now outside my window and attacking the car with a massive branch. May and I were now in full-blown panic mode, and I scoot as close to her as possible. Corduroy quickly retreats back into the woods, but then comes running back seconds later and slams the branch into the window again, like he's jousting. It's a miracle the window didn't break. Kathy perks up in her seat and starts pointing at the road ahead. I can see headlights. She blares the horn and flashes the lights. Lo and behold, it's our savior, Caleb. He brought his older brother along, Alex, and they both get out of his car and head over to us. May's sobs turn into joyous laughter as soon as she saw her brothers. Caleb and Alex have always been tall guys. Caleb was 6'8", and Alex is around 6'5", so I thought these two men, who were much taller than the Corduroy jouster, would make him leave, but I was mistaken. Caleb approaches the man, while Alex comes over to the car and taps on the window, telling Kathy to get out. She does and walks over to his car. May and I slowly exit the Geo as well, before making a bolt for Caleb's car, but I turn back to help Alex push the Geo further to the side of the road. While all this was happening, Caleb was distracting Corduroy by holding the end of the branch and telling him to fuck off. Corduroy yanks the branch away and starts backing up, going 2 steps back and 1 step forward, and eventually vanishes again from my view. I couldn't see him, but everyone else could. He backed up pretty far, but then he comes launching at Caleb, who takes off in the opposite direction. That branch could have really hurt him. Caleb runs past Alex and I, I was still behind the Geo, and the corduroy jouster suddenly changes directions and comes right at me. By the time my vision adjusted to see him, he was only a few feet away. I jump away just in time, as I heard the branch smash against the Geo's back window. I ran the long way around the car when I felt Caleb grab my arm and tug me over to his car. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me, and my legs didn't seem to work, but Caleb manages to shove me into the back seat and scrambles to the passenger side. By now we were all safely in the car, and the corduroy jouster is standing like a mantis in front of the headlights again. He had abandoned his weapon and just stood there with no intention of moving. Alex was in the driver's seat, and he puts the car into reverse, then slams on the gas, making me knock my head against the door. Then he makes the sloppiest U-turn in history, nearly flipping the car right off the road. But he gets back on track and speeds away, far exceeding whatever the speed limit was. Me and Kathy swear they saw Corduroy chasing behind us after Alex made the U-turn, but there was no way he was catching up to us now. We had escaped. The next day, I went back there with Caleb, Kathy, and a tow truck driver. Turns out none of us had the proper hitch to tow it ourselves. There was no sign of the corduroy jouster, but when we approached the Geo, we saw that in the space where the window didn't close all the way were my cigarettes. The box was missing, but they were all neatly jammed in a row along the window space. I have no idea what this guy's deal was. He was a mixture of hilarious, terrifying, ridiculous, yet dangerous. To this day, I wonder if he knew I was up in the tree when he took my cigarettes, or if he just decided to stick him through the window because he's a fucking weirdo. I also still wonder what the hell his intentions were. There are still many unanswered questions about what happened on that lonely road. Kathy got a new car that summer after telling her dad what happened, but we didn't know what we would even tell them. Some weirdo was smacking a stick against our car and sticking cigarettes in the window? The cops probably would have laughed us right out of the station and will likely assume we were all on drugs or something. I was recently talking to Alex and May about this incident, and Alex urged me to write this out and share it. May told me to shut up because she hates being reminded of this incident. If any of you find yourselves on a narrow back road in northern Michigan, be aware that somewhere out there, among the trees, lurks the corduroy jouster, taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Moving to Michigan from North Carolina was a big change for all of us. The climate was a huge difference, since we weren't as used to the cold, along with having to start a new school and meeting new people. However, there were other major differences as well. When we came to Michigan, our parents bought a 1-story house that had originally come with 2 bedrooms, but with having 3 girls, our parents remodeled and added another room. The neighborhood was a friendly one, with lots of children our age to play with. It seemed like we had hit the jackpot with this home. I was the youngest. When we moved, I was only 5. Things went great for the first 2 years of living there. Even with the additional bedroom, my sisters and I still liked sleeping in the same room, as we were all very close at the time. Most nights we would roughhouse around and watch TV until we were yelled at by our parents to go to bed. The night that this all began, we were watching Ghost Hunters. I had gotten up at some point to use the bathroom. I'm not sure what caused me to look out the window, but I felt like something was watching us. As I turned my head to look out, fear froze me on the spot. It was like being in a nightmare and not being able to do anything, as the face of a stranger stared back at me. Ice-cold shivers crawled down my spine, and a knot formed in my throat. I wasn't sure what to do in this situation. Did I call for my sisters and have them call me crazy if he suddenly disappeared? What if the person behind the window tried breaking through? I was completely terrified as I looked into the man's eyes. He had no expression, only blank eyes that would keep me awake for many nights to come. With a sudden burst of courage, I managed to get out. "There's someone at the window." Of course, my first fear was correct, and my older sisters didn't believe me. They thought I was playing a joke on them, as I kept my eyes on the face, making sure he didn't disappear, but at the same time wishing he would. Finally, after convincing them to just look, they both got up and saw him. My eldest sister ran to go get our father, as my other sister stood there with me. We were both scared, unsure of what to do. My dad woke up, along with our trusty black Labrador, Susie. They managed to chase the man away, and our dad called the police soon after. But they told us that since he had not tried to break in or hurt us, there wasn't much that they could do. After this incident, we began to question the neighbors, and they all responded with the same thing. The family with the fence around their property had an adult son who was mentally ill. He would often wander around the neighborhood at night, looking into the windows of where young girls stayed. It had gotten so bad with one of our neighbors that he made a bat with nails sticking out and threatened to use it on him if he tried coming back to his house again. My parents took this serious and proceeded to install inside locks and dark curtains on our windows so we couldn't see through. It seemed like the man had gotten the hint, and we didn't have any more encounters with him. That was until one night, my eldest sister, who was a teenager at the time, had just gotten out of the shower and was about to get dressed when she heard a noise at her window. She decided to stay in her towel and take a glance to see what the noise was, when she saw the man's face staring back at her. She screamed for my parents and immediately left her room. My dad was instantly up with a baseball bat in his hand and was going after the man with Susie on his heels. Susie took off after the intruder and bit his ankle, taking him down. While this was happening, my mom was on the phone with the police, and they were on their way. With help from Susie, our dad captured the man and held him there until the cops showed up. They arrested him, but because of his disability, he was released the following day. My parents were furious. They couldn't understand how the police could allow someone off who had been caught multiple times trespassing into people's yards and looking into their windows, specifically at young girls. The neighbors got together and set up a neighborhood watch soon after this incident, and they made sure that the homes with children were guarded 24/7. Something that should be known about my father is that he is an ex-Marine who has PTSD, and one of the side effects of that is insomnia. My father's condition actually gave him the advantage during these events, and he would keep watch at the house and would constantly check the yard for the man. This also helped us feel safer because we knew our dad was watching over us. It had barely been over a week since the man had looked into my sister's room when he came once again. This time, it was only my middle sister and I in our room. It was the early evening time, and my parents were hanging out in the living room with a friend. We had early bedtime because it was a school night, so we were both about to fall asleep when we could hear noises like someone was trying to get in. Fear immediately gripped both my sister and I, as by now, we both knew what was most likely happening. Her being older and more brave, she jumped out of bed and ran to go tell the adults what was happening. I, however, was frozen again, as I could hear the man trying to force open the locked window. I could do nothing more than hide under my covers and hope that he couldn't get in. It wasn't long before the adults were in the room, looking out the window. My mom came to comfort me while my dad checked things out. Since it was the winter time, my dad could see the man's footprints below our window, along with the handprints on the glass surface. His temper quickly flared as he told my mom to call the cops. Again, he decided to take matters into his own hands and walked over to the man's house. While there, he told the guy's parents what their son had been doing and that the cops were already on their way. This time, he would make sure that their son was arrested and that he would be pressing charges. To this day, my sisters and I are still frightened by this incident. We refuse to have any of the windows left uncovered or unlocked, and always make sure the doors are locked and secured as well. I'm not quite sure whatever happened to the man after he was arrested, but there was never again a face in our window after that night. To tell this story properly, I'll need to give a bit of background. I live near Grand Rapids, Michigan. As in most major cities, human trafficking happens quite frequently here. The reason I am mentioning this is because I go to college in this city, and at the time I was a 19, almost 20-year-old female with brown hair and blue eyes. Due to my age and my appearance, I fit the desired features of the women they usually target. This happened to me on February 26th, 2019. I had just gotten out of class for the day. As normal, I headed toward my car, transferred money onto my student card so I could get out of the school's parking garage, and I was on my way. Since I lived a good 20 to 25 minutes away from Grand Rapids, I have to go onto the highway to get home. Instead of going home that day, though, I made plans with one of my favorite teachers to help her out in class, and thank God I did. As I was getting off my exit, I noticed a white pickup truck behind me. At the time, I thought nothing of it and continued my normal route. To get to my former teacher's school, I had to go past my house. When I looked at my rearview mirror, I noticed this truck was still behind me. I shrugged it off, rationalizing that this truck just happened to be going the same way as me. I make a stop next to a local bar and grill, and then take a right turn. The truck followed me. I was still rationalizing this and trying my best to silence my paranoid mind. I sum it up to me just reading and listening to too many scary stories online. However, I'm unable to quiet my mind, and I'm now picking up on just how far the truck is keeping its distance from me, as if the driver didn't want me to see who they were or what they looked like. I take a left turn to get into the village where this teacher worked. This truck continues to follow me, but keeps the same distance as before. I am panicking at this point. All thoughts are now racing through my mind, and my gut is screaming at me that this doesn't feel right. This truck had followed me all the way from exit 95 to the village of Sparta. Part of me was still trying to rationalize this. I take a deep breath and make a quick decision. Once I get to the entrance of the elementary school, I will turn into there, go through the parking lot, and back out onto the road. If they follow me into the parking lot, I'll know for sure that this truck is following me. I turn into the parking lot, and the truck follows. I now know for sure that I am being targeted. As I continued through the parking lot, I believe the person inside the truck realized that I knew they were following me. Still thinking I'm paranoid, I try to reason with myself that this person might be dropping off their kid or picking them up. But as I continued toward the exit, I see this truck slowly pull up to the T intersection as if to watch me exit. At this point, I had already passed the student pickup and drop-off area. Somehow, I'm able to stay calm. I turn onto the road again, checking behind me every few seconds to see if this truck is still following me. I turn down another road and park near a few houses, taking a couple of deep breaths, adrenaline still running through me. I stayed there for a few more moments, just to make sure I've lost the truck. Once I feel ready, I make my way to a nearby coffee shop, order the drinks I had planned on getting for myself and my teacher, and then make my way back to the school's parking lot. The truck is nowhere to be seen. It wasn't until I was in the office that the adrenaline finally leaves. And when the office lady asked me if I was okay, I start to break down, crying and shaking. I told both my teacher and the receptionist what took place. I hug my teacher as if my life depended on it, and she told me to stop trying to rationalize this, that I was in fact in danger. This truck followed me for far too long and was acting so suspiciously. My teacher believes that they had malicious intent. I can't say for sure, but I believe this person was trying to catch me at my house or a secluded area to try and kidnap me and possibly put me into a human trafficking operation. I am so glad I listened to my gut feeling that day. I've been debating on sharing this story for quite some time, mostly because it doesn't have a lot of clarity. Something definitely happened, but what exactly it was, I don't know. So allow me to set the stage. At the time, I was living in Traverse City, Michigan. Beautiful landscape for those who are wondering. Huge glacier-carved hills and Lake Michigan at your back. I rented a small townhouse with a longtime friend a little ways outside the city. I had just gotten a hold of my old bicycle, which I had shipped up from my hometown, and I was planning on riding around, and that's how all this got started. It was my day off, and I decided to save on gas and ride my bike into town. I geared up, checked my tires, and ventured off. I had been big on riding my bicycle once upon a time, and it came back like, well, riding a bike. What I didn't notice, however, was how fast I was moving. If I was paying attention like I should have, I would have noticed the constant downward slope I was on, and how biking back up it would prove to be difficult. But none of that mattered at the time. I made it into town, did some shopping, met up with my roommate for dinner, and generally had a good time. Until I noticed the sun was beginning to set. So I said my goodbyes, hopped on my bike, and pedaled off into the sunset. At first I did okay, but that aforementioned incline wore me down. By the time I reached the last leg of my journey, it was pitch black, and I was walking my bike. At which point the road faced me with a choice. To my left was the regular route, which was well lit, but would also be a longer way to get to the townhouse I lived at. To my right was the way I usually took to and from town. I drove it every day, and had used it to come into town that very day, in fact. However, it was heavily wooded, unlit, but would be a shorter route, albeit with a steeper hill. I figured since I was already walking, I might as well take the shorter, more familiar way. So I turned on my bike's headlamp and headed into the darkness of the road through the woods. All went well at first. I trudged along and cursed myself for being stupid and overconfident with my bike. Then I heard it. Footsteps off to my right, somewhere in the forest. I stood still, and they stopped abruptly. There in the blackness, I debated on what it might be, but as a veteran of the woods, I hoped that it was just local wildlife, and continued on. The footsteps began again. They would stop just a hint after I did. I started, then stopped once more, just to be sure I wasn't hearing things. This time, the steps continued on for a solid 10 seconds after I stopped, making me positive there was someone, or something, out there, and they seemed to be following me. With this in mind, I weighed my options. If I dropped off the bike and ran home, it would be far too easy to catch me. The same was true even if I ran back towards town. I was not in any way prepared for a chase, and I didn't want to initiate one. I thought about the utility knife I always carry on me, but quickly dismissed that idea. I have enough martial arts training to be comfortable taking on whoever was out there with my bare hands, rather than escalating things with a blade. Instead, I called my roommate who was still in town and gave her my location. I told her what was happening, and she told me to stay put and that she would be there in 10 minutes. I hung up and started walking again. The footsteps started up again, this time faster and out of sync with mine. This is when I got angry. I have a weird thing where fear makes me angry and hostile, and being stalked through a forest had officially punched my buttons from terrified to murderous. So I turned around to the woods and shouted, with a voice I didn't know I had.
How about you come on out and face me? I'll rip your stomach open and wear your intestines as a necklace!
I don't know where I got the guts to say those words. It might have been a bad move, but the forest was abruptly quiet, and I heard nothing. I stayed still, staring hard, ready to beat the shit out of anyone who came out, but no one did. Then my roommate arrived on scene, her headlights almost blinding me as she turned the corner to where I was. I tossed my bike in her car, and we hauled ass. I collapsed once I got home, vomited from pure nerves, and finally fell asleep around 3 a.m. That's my story. I can't be certain what was out there in that forest with me. Was it a person? An animal? I feel compelled to lean toward the former, because it sounded like a person walking. And what animal would be so precise in its stalking, methodically moving right after I did? But who knows? Maybe I just scared the shit out of some poor porcupine. Regardless, I'd rather not have an encounter like that again. A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in the Chequamegon National Forest in northern Wisconsin. After our experience there, we do not plan on returning unless we go with a large group of people. We are originally from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin is our go-to place for a getaway. We've done a number of hiking trips in this area, but never to this particular region. We are by no means backpacking experts, but we have been to a number of national parks and have been hiking and exploring whenever we can find the time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in the solitude of nature, but this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike in a remote section of the North Country Trail. It's a very scenic path, much like what you would find in the Appalachians, although it is much lesser known. Some parts of the trail are very remote, and the only access is by logging roads. We had planned to hike for 15 miles along the trail until we got to a backpack shelter. We would set up camp around there. We spent the night at a friend's house in Wausau and set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest, we were captivated by the natural beauty of the thick, green forest. I drove slowly along the gravel roads as we made our way to our parking spot. While we were driving, We passed a couple of men standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be hillbillies, as they had a rusted-out, beat-up pickup truck, complete with a Confederate bumper sticker. As we passed, I gave a friendly wave, and they just stared back, without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. As we passed them by, I looked in my rearview mirror and noticed that they were still staring at us through the haze of the road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we didn't think anything of this encounter. Aside from those guys, we did not see anyone else on the remote logging roads. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later. There was no one else parked next to it. A perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our backpacks and set off down the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and flies at bay. We took pictures along the way and marveled at the lushness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. That's a collection of debris left behind by ice sheets for those who don't know. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of a wooden shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter's fire pit and boiled water for our trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around a Nalgene filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars were out in the night sky. When the fire was reduced to a small pile of embers, we decided to head back to the tent. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures that we had taken that day, but after lugging around a heavy backpack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. Whenever we camped at state or national parks, I usually wore earplugs, but on this night, there were no RVs or other campers making noise, so I closed my eyes and allowed the sounds of the forest to lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night. She usually has some apprehension about sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when she drifted off to sleep, but we awoke sometime later to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, we heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were now wide awake at this point. We lay silently in our tent when we heard the noise again. The tent we were using that night had no windows. We could only guess as to what was making the noise outside. We initially thought it had been an animal who had gotten into our leftover food or the garbage bag at the shelter, but the noise was too distinct. It did not sound like the rustling of food wrappers or the shifting of camping equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard the persistent sounds in the darkness. We were unarmed and scared shitless. We didn't know what to do in this situation. I normally carry bear mace on me, but I decided to leave it at home to save on the weight, against my girlfriend's wishes, a decision that was now coming back to haunt me. The sound continued as we remained as still as a grave. For all we knew, whatever was making the noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the sound ceased, and we lay in complete silence, only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then we heard it, leaves rustling, followed by low voices. We couldn't make out what was being said, but it sounded like at least two people were conversing with each other in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, they did not seem to be getting closer. Whoever was out there had not spotted our tent or just decided to leave us alone. We sat there for the rest of that night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly exited the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was there, but I only saw the labyrinth of trees beyond the shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and put our tent away. Before leaving, we decided to check out the shelter one more time. When we got there, my girlfriend screamed. Near the entrance was the word "kill" carved into the shelter wall, and there were a number of deep cuts. I looked to the ground and noticed a fresh scattering of wood splinters. Someone had been heaving an axe or driving a knife into the wooden wall, and that's what we heard last night. We got the hell out of there, nearly jogging with all of our gear on as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing back over my shoulder and looking off into the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed through the glacial debris we had seen the day before, and we knew that we were getting close. We were quietly rejoicing to ourselves. We got back to the trailhead in near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck on the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw that there was blood smeared on the windshield, and a carcass of a squirrel was impaled on the wiper blade, with the hair and blood still stuck on the wiper and across the hood of the car. I didn't bother clearing it off. We threw our gear into the trunk and sped off down the gravel logging roads. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't see anything through the cloud of road dust behind the car. When we got to the gas station by the nearest town, I removed the squirrel with a wad of newspaper and tried to remove as much dried blood from the car as I could. I filled up on gas, and we didn't stop until we made it back to Chicago. This was the last trip we ever took to the woods of northern Wisconsin. I live in a small town of about 11,000 people in Wisconsin, not by preference. It's for a job. We will be moving when I can get a better one. One day, I was on my way to my employer's house for a meeting. He runs the company out of his basement until we can find an office space to rent. I look into my rearview mirror and saw that I was being tailgated by a mysterious blue car, driven by a Caucasian bald man. I drive a Kia Soul, which has a flat back end, so if I can't see your headlights, you are mere inches away from my rear bumper. The driver honked at me. I flipped him off and slowed down to 5 miles under the speed limit. There wasn't anyone behind him, so I wasn't ruining anyone else's day. He had plenty of chances to pass me, but didn't. After a few minutes with no other cars around, and him still kissing my bumper at 50 miles per hour, I grabbed my cell phone and pretended to turn around quickly and take a photo of his car, hoping that this would scare him off. I was in the country with no other cars around, and this guy was giving me some bad vibes. I came to an intersection where I'd have to make a right turn, but I decided to see if this man would follow me and made a left turn instead. And of course, he followed. I then came to a roundabout and thought I would lose him there. I traveled the entire thing twice. He stayed on me the whole way. At this point, I knew he was messing with me, trying to get under my skin. Well, I decided to allow myself to be late for my meeting and began to drive to the local police station. He tailed me the whole way there. I pulled up and parked, ready to run inside. I thought he would just leave once he saw where we were. But no, he parked right next to me and just stared at me. He pulled up so close to my car that I would have had a hard time opening my car door all the way. The driver had to be in his 40s, wearing sunglasses, and had a creepy smile. He was wearing fairly neat clothes, and the interior of his car looked pristine. I was checking to see if he had a gun. I should mention here that I'm in training to be a behavior analyst, and while I only work with kids right now, my hobby is criminal psychology and profiling, and I was seriously trying to get a read on this guy. A few seconds went by, and I grabbed my phone again. This time I intended on calling 911 from the police station parking lot. As I dialed, the driver rolled his window down, still not saying anything. After staring at me for a while longer, he rolled his window back up, slowly backed out of his parking spot, and left. As soon as he was gone, I ran inside and told a police officer what happened. Unfortunately, I was too focused on not crashing to get a plate number. Apparently, there had been lots of complaints about tailgaters recently, with multiple reports of a man driving a blue car. I filled out a report with the officer, and he gave me a card for victim services and the address to a local women's shelter, just in case I was followed home one night. But I live in a secure apartment building with my fiancé. After I was done, I went back out to my car and noticed there was a note on the windshield. All it had on it was a smiley face. I took it back inside and showed the officer I just spoke with. "Wow, that's disturbing. You shouldn't go anywhere alone for a while. I'm going to call you later to check in on you." He did end up calling me twice, and said he was patrolling the parking lot of my apartment complex during his night shift. This is a small town, and the relationship with law enforcement is more communal than in the big cities. I felt safe knowing that someone with a badge had my back. If I ever see the man in the blue car again, no question, I will call the police and lead him straight to the station again if I can. As a precaution, I told my fiancé that I will post my work schedule, or if I had to leave for another reason, and said that if I didn't text him within 10 minutes of my estimated time of arrival, to call the police right away. My Uncle Sam told me this story the last time he was in town. Growing up, my uncle has always been the family joker. He was always pulling pranks and would fill the house with his bellowing laughter. I don't think I ever viewed him as a serious person before he told me of this experience. He was really into cars and asked to see my new Infiniti G37 sedan. So I took him out to the driveway and showed him the car with my dad. We did the usual pop the hood and rev the engine kind of stuff. And we all pretended that we knew what we were looking at as we stared into the engine well. That's when Sam wanted to tell us about something that happened to him back in his college days. He said that it would be a good lesson for me. This is honestly the first time I ever heard him speak in a very serious tone. There was also a hint of fear in his voice. He started out by saying that he had never told anyone about this before, but after seeing me with my new car, and the fact that I was a young guy, made him want to share this. Uncle Sam attended a small college in an isolated farming community of Wisconsin. The campus was in a town of about 10,000 people. Most were students or worked at the college, but there were some locals as well. He moved off campus during his junior year and into a new place with some friends about 3 miles outside of town. One night, after having quite a few beers with his friends, he decided that he better walk home since he had an exam the following morning, and he didn't live far from the tavern. As he made his way down the dark country road, with cornfields on either side, a man in a beat-up pickup truck pulled up next to him. The driver appeared to be a farmer. "Hey there, fella. You want a lift?" Sam, being intoxicated and not thinking straight, took him up on his offer. He got in the front passenger seat and they took off. He gave the man directions to the house he lived in with his college buddies, and then about 5 minutes into the drive, he noticed that the man had gone past the turn they needed to take. He informed the man that his house was behind them, and they would need to turn around. "Oh, I've lived around these parts for 50 years now. I know a shortcut to where you're staying. Pay attention so you can remember it." That's when Sam started to get suspicious. The potential danger he was in sobered him up real quick. The farmer eventually pulled into a dirt driveway that led up to an old farm that appeared to be falling apart. There was a very old playground set in the front yard, with a shed in the back of the property that looked like it had lights on. The rest of the property was shrouded in darkness, the only illumination coming from the headlights of the pickup truck and the glow of the moon. My uncle's plan was to bolt the second the man slowed down enough. So when the farmer came to a stop, my uncle tried to push up on the lock knob, hoping the door would open. However, the top of the knob had been sawed off, meaning that he wouldn't be able to unlock it manually. At this point, he knew he was trapped. Uncle Sam then abruptly ended the story with, "I fought the man off and sprinted back home. So if you ever plan on doing some drinking with your friends, always make sure you have a designated driver to take you back home. Now, let's go inside." I don't think my uncle wanted to admit it, but something very bad happened to him out at that farm. I could tell by the look in his eyes that whatever happened has haunted him for many years. I'll be taking his advice to heart and will never accept rides from strangers. I grew up in a wooded area of Illinois, on a dead-end street over 10 miles away from the nearest town. There were 7 other houses in the area, separated by at least 2.5 acres of trees and bushes. A strange fact about this particular location is that there aren't many bears or other large mammals in this region. I suppose it's because there wouldn't be much food supply for them around here. This is the kind of place where, if you didn't live here, you were likely lost. When I was in my early teens, I had a good friend who was a few years older than me, who lived next door. His name was Terry. Terry was allowed to go out with his friends much later than I was, and he would sometimes cut through my yard after getting home late and throw rocks near my bedroom window to get my attention. My bed was right next to the window, and I would open it and we would chat for a while. My bedroom was on the second story of my house, and it faced our backyard, and I could see Terry's house from my window and the walking path that led to his driveway. I would often know if he was home or not. If the light was left on over his side entrance, he would be out somewhere. If it was off, he was likely home. One night, during the summer, when my window was open, I heard a car in his driveway dropping him off. It was probably around midnight. I heard Terry getting out of the car and was chatting with his friends. After a short while, the car pulls away, and I poke my head out and whisper shouted to Terry as loud as I could, without waking my parents. But he didn't respond. He probably couldn't hear me. I then came up with the not-so-brilliant idea to sneak outside and scare him. I've spent many years in this forest, learning how to blend in with the environment and how to be silent. So I silently crept down from the second floor and left my house through the garage exit door, which led to our backyard. From there was a short walk to Terry's house. My parents had put in a gravel pit around the back of the house, likely because nothing really grew there due to the shade of the oak trees. Between the trees was an uneven gravel path, which made a very distinct crunch once you stepped on it, which would give you away. So I expertly made my way through the backyard and silently across the gravel path to Terry's house. My eyes had adjusted to the dark, but I still didn't see him. I then noticed that the light over his side entrance was now off. signaling that he already went inside. I waited for a bit just to make sure. I then saw something moving in the woods between our houses. This was odd, because if you didn't stay on the path, there were wild rose bushes and raspberry plants which had thorns and were painful to walk through if you weren't careful. So I was wondering why Terry would be out in the woods. Perhaps he had seen me and wanted to scare me instead. But the dark figure I saw was moving through the woods very slowly and pausing every once in a while. It was coming closer and closer to my position. At this point, I still thought it was Terry, and I hunched down and waited in silence, wondering if I could still startle him. I soon lost sight of the figure in the foliage. It seemed to be walking slowly and checking every few feet while trying to remain hidden, so I whispered after losing patience,
"Terry, is that you?"
No one answered, so I quietly tiptoed back to my garage door and went back inside. I guess we had planned to do the same thing to each other, and we just kind of canceled out. I snuck back upstairs to my room. My window was still open, and I could definitely hear someone walking around the forest. I poked my head out again and whispered for Terry, but still got no answer. I then heard something fall, followed by a grunt right below my window. It wasn't loud enough to wake my parents, but definitely loud enough to send a shock of fear through me. I suddenly realized something. Terry was very familiar with the layout of my backyard and the path in the forest like the back of his hand. He wouldn't have tripped and fallen. Whoever was roaming around outside might not have been Terry. This was no longer a fun game of cat and mouse. An unknown person was walking around our backyard, possibly trying to find a way inside. I tried to look outside my window as best I could, but there was a screen on my window to keep bugs out, so I couldn't lean my head out the window to see the wall of our house directly below me. I then heard the crunch of rocks as whoever was out there was now stepping on the noisy gravel. This confirmed for me that it was not Terry. At the risk of sounding pedantic, if it was Terry sneaking around out there, he would know how to circumvent the path and not give away his position by stepping on the gravel. He knew that my parents were pretty strict, and his stealth skills were on par with mine. I pretty much sat there with my face pressed against the screen for probably around half an hour. It seemed like a whole hour, but I'm sure I didn't have the patience back then to wait that long. I never heard whoever it was leave, but I grew tired and eventually fell asleep. There are a few things I'm certain of. It definitely wasn't Terry. I asked him about it later, and he said he went straight to bed that night. As I mentioned earlier, there aren't many big animals in this area. We only ever had deer pass through here, but they usually didn't come near our houses. What I saw moving around in the forest was definitely a person, not an animal. And I can't think of any good reason that someone would be out there at that time of night, sneaking around in the dark forest. For a bit of background, I used to live in a reasonably sized city of about 30,000 in Illinois. After the big factories closed down, this place became a cesspool of drug addiction and crime. Additionally, the city also became one of the places where low-income housing projects cropped up once Cabrini Green closed down in Chicago. Many of those people relocated there, which spiked the crime rates. I'm not prejudiced against anyone. I myself have lived in low-income housing, so I know how difficult it can be. Once the city started going downhill, drug-related crimes increased several times over. leading to downright horrifying living conditions. People staying in homes that are condemned, or forced to deal with slumlords who didn't care if there were roaches crawling down the walls, or if they had running water or working electricity. Once beautiful neighborhoods now sit rotting away, or occupied by junkies. Almost 50% of the adult population who live in this city do so in poverty. For an idea of how awful the crime is here, I've lost count of the acts of prostitution and drug dealing I've witnessed over the years in broad daylight. I once saw a man being beaten in the head with a baseball bat on our street. The crime rate of the city has become one of the highest in the nation. I was fortunate enough to be able to move out of the city about 5 or so years ago, but I still return every few months, as I have excellent doctors who still operate in that area, and I've been burned too many times trying to switch doctors, but that's a whole other story. The crime rate of the city has become one of the highest in the nation. I was fortunate enough to be able to move out of the city about 5 or so years ago, but I still return every few months, as I have excellent doctors who still operate in this area, and I've been burned too many times trying to switch doctors, but that's a whole other story. So I was in my old city for a doctor's appointment on one fateful afternoon, accompanied by my mother. When it was over, I chose to go down the historic Main Street. This street has incredibly old buildings that are actually in really good shape. It's pretty much the best street in the entire city now, relics of a time where this city was actually a nice place to live. Which seems like a warm sentiment until you realize that 2 of the buildings are a federal courthouse and a county courthouse. Many of the city's problems are both created and resolved in them. Due to the fact that it's a pedestrian-heavy area, the speed limit is only 15, and there are plenty of stop signs throughout the main part of the street. As I was coming up to the first 4-way stop, this beat-up-looking red Pontiac Grand Am, driven by a heavy-set white woman, had already stopped. What happened next is something that I will never forget as long as I live. While the car goes through the intersection, I look into the back seat and get the shock of my life. In the back is a young white woman being held down by 2 black males. Her face was bright red, and it was obvious she was freaking out, with tears streaking down her face. One of them was holding her shoulders down so she couldn't break free, while the other had his hand over her mouth. She and I locked eyes for a moment, and the look on her face was one of pure terror. Never in my entire life have I ever seen such an expression on another human being's face. The young woman was clearly afraid for her life, and judging the situation from the outside, that's a perfectly fair assessment. If someone is kidnapping you in broad daylight, going incredibly slow down the street, 1 block from both federal and county courthouses, where there is usually at least 1 police car around that area, it's pretty damn clear that A, they don't give a damn about being caught, and B, they are probably going to do something incredibly bad to whoever they captured. As soon as it registered what I had just seen, I went ahead through the intersection, pulled into a nearby parking area, and with my hand shaking, I pulled out my cell phone and immediately called 911. I gave a detailed description of the car, as well as the men in the back seat and the poor woman being held captive. Unfortunately, I was so shaken up by what I saw, I forgot to write down the license plate number of the car. This is something that I still feel guilty about. The dispatch assures me that she'll send patrol cars out that way, and there's now an APB out on that vehicle. Over the following months, I kept checking the local news outlets, hoping that I would see something, anything about what I witnessed, although I was praying that I didn't hear about that young woman I saw being found murdered in a ditch somewhere, or possibly sold into a prostitution ring. However, I heard absolutely nothing regarding the incident. but I'm hoping it's just due to the fact that the police managed to miraculously track down the car and rescued her. But I very much doubt they did. The police around there never pass up an opportunity for good PR. Given the amount of drug-related crime in that area, I suppose that it's possible that she owed a debt and they were determined to collect in one way or another, possibly by forcing her into prostitution. Or maybe it was someone that she knew, like maybe a junkie boyfriend, and she was taken as collateral. Perhaps she was already a prostitute, and those were her pimps, collecting wages by force. Or maybe it was just a plain old kidnapping for ransom. The more I think about this situation, the more it occurs to me that I have a burning hatred for that woman who was driving the car. I understand that the monsters in the back seat are the true villains of this story, but there's just something about the complacency of the driver that just infuriates me. There's a special kind of hell waiting for that bitch who was so willing to betray another woman and take part in her suffering. I wish I had some definitive answers regarding the situation, even if I were to find out the girl didn't make it out alive, if for no other reason than to help get those bastards arrested or testify at their trials. It's still absolutely disgusting to me that shit like this takes place in America. There's no excuse for it. This is a story that my dad has told and retold throughout the years. It's as creepy now as it was the first time I heard it. You can believe whatever you want, but I know my father wouldn't make this up. It was the early 1970s in Des Plaines, Illinois. It wasn't uncommon for young people to hitchhike from one place to another. My dad and my uncle enjoyed doing this, as they were always down for an adventure. They both were in their early teens at the time. That day, they had just gone fishing. Once they were done, they made their way to a nearby coffee shop parking lot and searched for a ride home. When they had no luck, they started thumbing out on the road. A middle-aged man then stopped to pick them up. There was nothing really remarkable about this man. He was just a typical guy, a tad bit overweight. So they climbed into the car with him. My dad sat in the front passenger side, while my uncle sat in the middle of the back seat. Everything was going fine, until the driver, in mid-conversation, reached his arm towards the back of the car and placed his hand on my uncle's knee. My dad's alarm bell started sounding off right away. As soon as they came to a stoplight, my dad got out of the car, took his brother by the arm, and pulled him out of there. The driver did not pursue them. He just stared at them with cold, emotionless eyes as they took off down the road. Fast forward a few years later, it's 1978, and my dad catches a glimpse of a familiar face in the Chicago newspaper. To his surprise, it was the man who had picked him up a few years back. The article stated that this man was arrested after police found the bodies of 33 teenage males buried in several places beneath his home, including the crawl space. This sick freak would prey on teenage boys wherever he could to brutalize, molest, and murder them. Both my father and history will never forget his name, John Wayne Gacy. Needless to say, I am happy that my dad reacted as quickly as he did. Both he and my uncle were the right age to be one of his victims. It's scary to think about what could have happened and how I wouldn't be here today if that situation had played out differently. I heard you were looking for stories from the cesspool called Los Angeles. Unfortunately, we can't choose where we were born, and I have the distinct honor of being born and raised in the city of demons. I could go into the litany of experiences I've had being harassed by drug addicts, chased by gang members, or was almost in the crossfire of a shootout, but I feel like all of you listening have heard stories like this before.
They are a sad reality, but it isn't something that really surprises you, right? We've sadly become accustomed to the violence that takes place in the streets of America, especially LA, and no one seems to have the solution to the problem. However, every once in a while, you hear a story that makes you pause and reflect on how fucked up it is. I'd like to think that this is one of those stories. Back in 2012, I worked for a small startup business that operated out of the St. Vincent Jewelry Center in downtown Los Angeles. I was an employee, but I was friends with the guys who founded the company, and I even shared an apartment with them. I didn't own a car at the time, but it usually wasn't an issue for me, because I could carpool with one of my roommates to and from work. That was until they had to attend a meeting in San Francisco. I told them not to worry, and that I would take a taxi to the office while they were away, or would find a ride with someone else. But I ultimately decided to walk to our office space. At the time, I was looking for ways to burn a certain amount of calories each day, and figured I could keep up with my fitness goals and save a trip to the treadmill by simply walking to work while my roommates were gone. The one downside was that the most direct path to the office took you straight through one of the worst areas of Skid Row. So, I would have to make sure to avoid this area. The day of, I walked to work, taking a route that avoided the danger zone. The only thing of note was seeing a homeless man passed out by a dumpster in an alley, a few blocks away from my apartment building. Work went well that day. It was a bit busier than usual with the bosses being gone. It ended up being a 12-hour shift, so by the time we were done, it was around 10 p.m. A co-worker named Kevin and I decided to stop at a bar to finish off the day. This worked out for me because the place we went to was only a few blocks away from my apartment building and would shorten the distance I had to walk. So we drove to the bar, had some drinks, and called it a night. He offered to drive me to my apartment, but I insisted that I would walk the rest of the way. I knew that Kevin lived in Inglewood, so the sooner he left, the better. I don't remember the exact street names, but I knew the way back to my apartment from where I was, and that I wasn't near Skid Row, so I began to make my way down the street. It was uncharacteristically quiet. You could still hear the soundscape of the city in the distance, but the dim lighting and the lack of pedestrians made me feel a bit uneasy. About 5 minutes into the walk, and about 3 minutes from my destination, I passed by the alley where I had seen the homeless man from earlier. It was your typical city alleyway with dumpsters, drain pipes, and loading docks. However, there was somebody by one of the dumpsters with their back turned to me, crouching down. From the looks of it, it appeared to be an adult woman with her hair tied back into a ponytail. As soon as I saw her, I instantly knew something was off. I could hear these strange sounds, like someone was tearing into a steak. I don't know why. Any other day I would have just kept walking, but I was compelled to see what this woman was doing. Maybe she was sick or something. I cautiously approached. As I did, the wet sound grew louder. When I was about 5 yards away, I cleared my throat and asked, "Ma'am, are you okay?" The woman finally stopped what she was doing and stood up. She was wearing a pair of jeans and a light blue top. It didn't look like she was homeless. However, she did not turn around. I then heard her spitting something out. Without saying a single word to me, she took off down to the other side of the alley and disappeared. The alley was dark, and I had to use a small light on my keychain to see what the woman had been crouching over beside the dumpster. When I turned on my light, what I saw was the most disgusting and terrifying thing I have ever laid my eyes on. Lying on the ground was the homeless man from earlier, but his face was almost completely gone. It was just a bloody, gaping hole. Lying on his chest was his tongue. I instantly hunched over and vomited. I then ran the rest of the way back to my apartment and immediately told a security guard working in the lobby to call 911. I waited there for the police to show up so I could report what I saw. I never heard of any follow-ups or news reports about this incident, which is super surprising to me because that cannibal attack in Miami was big news around this time. But I guess the crackdown on gang-related violence was more of a priority for the LAPD back then. I had trouble sleeping for quite some time after this incident. The visage of that man's half-eaten face took a while for me to get over, and I still don't know what to make of what I saw in that dark alley. A seemingly normal-looking woman was crouched over a homeless man and was taking a bite out of him. I sometimes regret not seeing her face, so I could have gave the police a more accurate description of the suspect, but sometimes I'm glad she never turned around. Moral of the story? If you can hitch a ride with someone you trust in downtown LA, do it. Last year, I started law school in Los Angeles. I have never lived in a big city before, and I was really excited to relocate to a massive city with over 4 million people. Ever since I was little, I always knew that I had a half-sister who lived in Los Angeles, but my parents always had this weird disposition toward her that always made it feel like a taboo topic. Of course, I had to look her up on social media, and I knew what she looked like, but that was about all I had to go on. We had never actually met, and she was never that active on social media, so there wasn't a lot I could discern about her life. Out of nowhere one day, in my first year of law school, I received a friend request on Facebook from my half-sister. I had never seen this particular Facebook profile of hers before, but it seemed legitimate. She had lots of friends, and her profile picture resembled her. She sent me a message inviting me to a dinner party at a park with a couple of her friends. We could finally meet each other in person for the first time. I was actually new to Los Angeles, and I had no idea which parts of the city to avoid at night. I was excited about the idea, but I also had a lot of anxiety about it as well. It would be nice if we met and became besties for life, but what if we ended up sobbing together like we were in some dramatic movie scene? What if I tried to talk with her and she just didn't vibe with me and started showing me an attitude? Or worse, what if all was going well and we had some kind of disagreement? Someone said something hurtful toward the other, and then we both end up crying in front of everyone. Honestly, if she had suggested a cozy little bakery for desserts instead, I would have gone. But going to a park with other people didn't feel right to me, especially for an icebreaker. I thought it was like such a precious moment that I didn't want to have in front of all these other people I didn't know. A few weeks later, I Googled that park just to see what it was like. Maybe we could still meet up there together, just one-on-one. That's when I learned something was off about this whole thing. I won't say the name of the park, but anyone who has lived in Los Angeles for long will tell you that it is not a safe place for a bunch of girls to have a dinner party there. The area surrounding that park has a very high violent crime rate. It's mostly controlled by gangs. Even the people who conduct illegal business in that area are forced to pay a tax to the gangs in order to be left alone. So now I was really concerned and curious. I actually tried to get a hold of my half-sister by other means. I found out that she was an undergrad at a local college. I had a friend who went to her school, and I asked my friend to reach out to her on campus and see if she would be okay with meeting. They connected, and the three of us met at my friend's house, and we got along well. The three of us had lots of fun. We weren't bursting into tears, but we did let out a few. We had dinner together, watched a movie, and spent the night at my friend's house. When I told my sister about the Facebook interaction, She told me that she hadn't used Facebook since high school. So clearly, someone was impersonating her. I would have told her to report the fake account, but it had already been deleted. She knew that she had been impersonated on social media before. Another one of her friends had been scammed by someone pretending to be her. It was some scheme involving fake concert tickets or something like that. It's very disturbing to think about the big picture here. Someone had been impersonating my sister, who knew I was in town, and they literally tried to lure me to one of the most dangerous parts of LA. I have no idea what their motives were, and I don't even think I want to find out. Meeting my half-sister after all these years ended up being a great thing for my life, but it almost ended up being terrifying. I'm a 27-year-old female, and this happened when I was 24. I live in Los Angeles, California, and have for my entire life. I was feeling lonely one day, so I decided to go onto Craigslist. Yeah, I know. Very bad decision making. I tried to find someone to hang out with. Not necessarily a date, just someone to chill with. If it led somewhere, then so be it. That was my naive thinking in those days. The free spirit mentality can really put you into some dangerous situations. I exchanged emails with a few guys, one of which stood out to me. He sent me some pictures and I was okay with how he looked. He seemed nice enough. I agreed to have him pick me up and grab a cup of coffee. It took him a lot longer than he said it would to get to my place, and once he arrived, I instantly regretted agreeing to this. But being overly polite and feeling awkward, I went along. Instead of heading to Starbucks as we planned, we drove to CVS. What are we doing here? I have to return some stuff real quick, so I have some money for the drinks. I was super uncomfortable and just wanted to get out of there, but my shyness got the better of me, and I just decided to wait it out. Once he returned, he said, "I have to stop by my apartment really quick. I forgot something." We pulled into an underground garage. Once we parked, he said, "Be right back." You have no idea how badly I just wanted to run as soon as he left, but I didn't. Once he got back into the car, again, I could tell right away that he was high on something. Having been to rehab myself, it was obvious to me. I then told him that I had gotten an emergency phone call while he was upstairs, and that I was sorry but I had to be taken back, and that he could just drop me off at the nearest train station, so he didn't have to drive me all the way back home. He nodded his head, and the car ride became even more awkward than before. We soon got onto the freeway, which was the fastest route to the station, but we ended up passing the exit we had to take. I told him a few miles ahead of time, "Hey, you just passed the exit." He just simply ignored me. Instead of pulling over to the right lanes, he kept pulling further and further over to the left until we were in the far left lane. I asked him what he was doing, trying to keep my cool. I don't remember his exact words, but it was something along the lines of, "I'm not dropping you off. We're gonna have some fun together. Why do you think I did all this?" I looked at him with my jaw nearly dropping to the ground. I then asked him, "So you're refusing to drop me off?" "Yeah." He then sped up the car. The first thing I thought of was to call the police, so I pulled my phone out. He then reached over and hit me in the face so hard that I dropped my phone. I was in total shock. The phone had fallen somewhere below the driver's seat, so I couldn't get to it. I was now panicking. As we continued down the highway, I tried desperately to think of what I should do. We came up to another interstate, and for some reason, seeing the freeways intersect and how we were about to get onto a ramp was extremely alarming to me. We were getting further and further away from Los Angeles. and I decided right then and there that I could not allow him to get onto that next freeway. I couldn't jump out of the car. I would die instantly. So I did the only other thing I could think of. I took in a deep breath and grabbed the steering wheel, turning it as hard as I could to the right. He was so shocked that he didn't even try to grab it back from me as we sideswiped 2 other cars and eventually crashed into the side barrier. He then started hitting me while screaming. I put my legs up to block the blows from his fists. We had hit the side barrier, but he was able to regain control of the car and put some distance between the car and the barrier. While he was hitting me, I reached for the handle and fell backward out of the car. I quickly got up and ran to one of the cars we had crashed into. They were both pulled over behind us. The guy in the car had his phone out, presumably calling the police. I knocked on his window, screaming that this psycho had just tried to kidnap me. The guy's window had been down slightly before I knocked on it, but after I shouted at him, he rolled it up all the way. I couldn't believe it. When I looked back, Mr. Psycho was now coming towards me, as clearly no one was going to help me. "Fuck this noise," I said, and I ran toward the fencing beyond the concrete barrier. I'm already not in amazing shape, and I was even weaker because of what had just happened, so I literally had to lean on the fence until it bent enough for me to jump over it, crash landing hard on the other side. Luckily, instead of pursuing me, Mr. Psycho ran in the opposite direction and just left his car on the side of the freeway. Once I was over the fence, I realized that I was on some horse trails that I was familiar with because I had worked at the equestrian center nearby. So I just walked through the miles of trails until I got to the next nearest city, which was Burbank. I then called the cops from a bowling alley telephone. I never found out what happened to Mr. Psycho or my phone. The cops never followed up with me after I filed the report, but I hope he got in some kind of trouble for, trying to take me somewhere against my will to have some fun. This took place on April 23rd of last year. For context, I live in Minnesota, where spring weather can be quite unpredictable. I had just become friends with a coworker named Ben, mainly because we are both fans of horror films and enjoy discussing them. We live in a very remote area with not much else to do. When we found out that one of our favorite movies was being re-released in theaters in a city a couple hours away, we decided to make a trip out of it. We planned to stay overnight in the city, then head to a cabin near the Mississippi River another few hours away. I booked the cabin on Vrbo 2 months in advance. The listing mentioned 2 sheds on the property. One was off limits and used for the owner's storage, but the other had a sitting area with some recreational items in it: pool table, kayaks, and cornhole boards. A week before our trip, I received an email with basic booking details, but it noted that the host hadn't provided information on how to access the cabin. I contacted the host directly to ask about getting in, but I never received a response. On Thursday, we went to go see the movie and ended up bar hopping afterward. I had too much to drink. The next morning, I woke up in the hotel room with a terrible hangover, and I was not happy about the 7 a.m. checkout time. The cabin listing said that we would check in after 3 p.m., so we had some time to spare before the long drive. I still hadn't heard back from the host, but I decided to wait it out and hope that he would get back to me by 3 o'clock. It was one of the first warm weekends of spring, reaching the mid-60s. Ben and I grabbed some breakfast and took a short hike before setting off. Once we arrived in the nearest town to the cabin, we stopped at a grocery store for supplies and booze. I still hadn't heard back from the host, and it was now past 3 o'clock. So I messaged him again, but got no response. First, I tried the chat support, which gave me his phone number. However, when I called it, it wasn't in service. Next, I called customer support, and the attendant found it odd that the host had removed his phone number from the account. She said that she would call back in about 5 minutes. When she did, she told me that she had gotten in touch with the owner and that he would contact me soon. Almost immediately after hanging up with her, I received a phone call. The host apologized, saying that he had forgotten to note that he had rented out the cabin for that weekend. I told him I understood. Mistakes happen. And I was just glad that we sorted it out, since Ben and I hadn't driven almost 4 hours across the state for nothing. He said everything would be ready in an hour. I was a bit annoyed, but I didn't want to argue with him. He called back within the hour to say that the cabin was ready and asked how many nights we were staying. Call me crazy, but I think he should have already known how long we booked it for. That's 2 oddities so far. Forgetting someone booked his cabin and not knowing for how long. 3 if we're counting how he didn't respond to anyone until now. He mentioned over the phone that he lived nearby, and not to hesitate to ask if we needed anything. He said that the cabin would be unlocked and the keys would be on the counter. When we finally arrived at the cabin, we started unloading our things. The yard sloped down about 40 feet to a dock along the river. The cabin was cozy, with 1 bedroom, a loft above, and an open layout. Ben took the bedroom, and I set up in the loft. The cabin had windows on all 4 sides, offering a near 360-degree view of the surroundings, except for the walls making up the bedroom. Since it was warm, we decided to keep the windows open at night. We built a small fire outside, grilled some walleyes we caught off the dock, and had a few beers. When it got late, we put out the fire and went back inside. There was a small TV mounted in the living room opposite the loft. Ben turned it on and flipped through the channels. The only light came from the TV and the fan light above the stove. I climbed the ladder to the loft to get my phone charger from my bag. I was looking down into the living room, talking with Ben while he stood facing me. The back door, which was more of a side door to the cabin, had the trash cans next to it under the windows. Earlier, I had noticed a water bottle lying on the ground nearby. While we were talking, we heard the sound of plastic being crushed, like when someone collapses an empty water bottle with their hand, or steps on it. I turned to the window and caught a glimpse of a figure ducking out of sight. My stomach dropped, and my heart began to race. I quickly jumped down from the ladder and told Ben to close all the windows. We shut all 12 of the windows of the cabin and drew the curtains closed. Ben thought I was just being paranoid and suggested it was likely a raccoon, saying that there was no need to call and wake up our host over a scavenging carnivora. I went to turn on the outside light, but discovered that there was no bulb in the fixture. Ben and I each took a flashlight and walked in opposite directions around the cabin, but we didn't notice anything odd. We decided to call it a night after that. While I was dozing off, I swear I could hear movement from outside, like footsteps walking around the cabin. I assumed it might have been a deer wandering around out there and fell asleep. The next morning, while preparing to check out a nearby hiking trail, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a middle-aged man with a pair of cold eyes that looked like they could stare you into submission. "Are you Evan?" I said yes, and he introduced himself as the owner of the property. We got to talking, and he apologized for the check-in issues, giving me a gift card to a local restaurant as a gesture of goodwill. He asked if he could hang around outside for about half an hour because he had forgotten to do some minor maintenance. "Oh, sure." I watched him from a window as he set up a bird feeder out front, then checked the lock on the shed that was off limits. He then just stood there, eyeballing the cabin for a while, before finally leaving. Very strange. We received weather alerts about an approaching snowstorm that would come through the next day, so we went into town to buy some more food, since we planned on staying another 2 nights. Once we returned, I went to grab something out of my bag and noticed that it was unzipped and moved a foot off to the side. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I misremembered where I had placed my bag and simply forgot to zip it back up. In hindsight, I'm not so sure about that. That night, we spent it inside gaming and watching movies while the storm passed through. Monday was checkout day. Ben gathered our belongings while I cleaned the cabin. I took out some trash and stood by the back door, taking pictures of the river. I should mention that Ben and I smoke a little reefer every now and then. When we got back to the truck and were making our way down the snow-covered driveway, Ben joked, "You wanted to get high so bad last night that you went out in that snow and wind? You're crazy." I was confused and asked him what he meant by that, because I hadn't even brought any weed with me on this trip. He looked puzzled and said, "When I first went outside, I saw half-filled-in footprints in the snow, to and from the sheds, around my truck, and both cabin doors." It then dawned on me. When our host said that he lived nearby, I couldn't help but think he was staying in the shed. That was off limits, and he was apparently walking around the cabin at night, even during the snowstorm, and had gone through our stuff when we left for the store. From the moment we got there, that place gave me bad vibes, and I won't be returning to that place in my lifetime. When I was around 17, the year was 2017. Urbex had become pretty popular on YouTube, and living in a small town in Minnesota, there was no shortage of abandoned places to explore if you knew where to look, so I decided to hop on the trend. There was a 3-story mansion just outside of Asante, about 50 miles north of Minneapolis, that had been abandoned for around 20 years. The mansion itself was literally in the middle of nowhere. There were several rumors about what happened at that place, from an entire family being murdered by an escaped psychopath to some kind of deformed man living there. The true story is much less exciting. The owner was in major debt, went broke, and his house was eventually repossessed by the bank. They tried to turn it into a rental property, but a severe mold infestation prevented that. Ever since, it just sat, empty, and rotting away. I talked to my group of friends about exploring the place for a possible YouTube video. We would make a quick walkthrough with just me and another friend, David, to check things out before bringing the entire gang along with the camera gear. One Saturday night, around 11 p.m., David and I parked on a back road about a quarter mile away from the destination. We really didn't want to get caught. The police around here are pretty bored most of the time and would have jumped at the chance to arrest a couple of teenagers for trespassing. The house sat on a 3-acre property, mostly surrounded by forest. We hiked through the trees, making sure we kept our flashlight use to a minimum, until we came upon the old house. Our original plan was to go through the back door, but it was locked, so we decided to go around to the front of the house and try our luck there. We entered a porch area that appeared to have been screened in at some point, but was now just metal frames with shreds of mesh hanging from them. There was also an assortment of old furniture, lawn chairs, and wooden crates. After looking around for a bit and snapping some photos, we approached a pair of double doors, only to see that they were chained shut. Most of the windows we saw were either boarded up or completely smashed out. We wanted to avoid entering through a broken window if we could, but it looked like we would have no choice. So we found an opening on the ground level, on the other side of the house. As we approached, I got this strange feeling like something terrible was about to happen. I knew the rumors of what took place here were just made-up stories, but standing outside the dark, abandoned mansion in the dead of night was enough to make even a skeptic like me second-guess himself. And just because those stories never happened, didn't mean nothing ever bad happened here. I'll admit that my apprehension did involve some concern about spooky ghosts. I grabbed David's shoulder and stopped him from going any further. "What's the problem? I thought I heard something. Just listen." In truth, I hadn't heard anything. I just wanted him to stop walking so we could both listen before entering the old house. We were approaching the open window from an angle, so we couldn't see directly into it. But it's a good thing we stopped when we did, because what we heard next was far scarier than what I had initially been concerned about. The pump of a shotgun is a sound that immediately grabs your attention, and that's exactly what we heard coming from the open window. As soon as we heard it, David and I hauled ass in the opposite direction, running back toward the front porch and making our way around the other side of the house, the way we had come from. As soon as we made it back to the tree line, we heard a gunshot coming from the mansion. I'm not 100% sure if someone was firing at us, because the blast did sound like it came from somewhere inside the mansion, but we weren't sticking around to find out. We backtracked to the car and got the hell out of there. Needless to say, we never ended up filming an urbex video there. I'm not sure what was taking place inside that old mansion the night we went there, but someone was inside that house with a loaded shotgun. It could have been just some vandal putting in some target practice, but something tells me they were waiting for us to come within the direct line of sight of that open window. Shotgun aimed. I don't know that for sure. They could have just stayed quiet and we would have kept going toward the window. But for whatever reason, they decided to pump their shotgun, alerting us to their presence. I suppose if they really wanted us dead, I wouldn't be here now, telling this story. This event effectively ended my urbex aspirations. We never returned to Shotgun Manor. But as far as I'm aware, it still sits there to this day, silent, but empty. I couldn't tell you. My story involves myself and 3 of my really good friends from childhood. I'll have them go by Kevin, Ryan, and Tommy, whom I am still very good friends with to this day. I wouldn't be able to recount this experience if it wasn't for their help. The story you are about to hear is true, and not made up in any way, regardless of whether we have been seeing things or not. The reality is we experienced something truly horrifying one night at Tommy's family-owned cabin. We thought long and hard about actually sharing it, afraid of being ridiculed. But we're finally ready to put this out there. One of my friends actually suffered a nervous breakdown after the incident and needed counseling. Regardless, I would like you to know that I have always been skeptical of the paranormal and find it hard to believe in many aspects. But I love to watch, listen, and read about it, simply because I have an open mind. In my opinion, an open mind is a growing one. Whether what took place was paranormal or not, someone was clearly there that night. Now, finally, on with the story. During midsummer, usually around the middle of July, my group of friends and I always made time to go to Tommy's cabin in northern Minnesota, Vermilion Lake to be exact. Throughout all of our childhood years, we would always go, accompanied by Tommy's dad, and sometimes a few of our dads as well. At this time, we were juniors in high school, and we all felt mature enough to go to the cabin without any adult supervision.
I would like to mention a bit of information regarding the cabin to help you picture the scenario. Vermilion Lake is very remote, and the cabin is situated on a very large island, along with some other cabins, but the nearest one was a solid half-mile away, which you could get to by taking a hiking trail. To get to my friend's cabin, you had to park on a gravel road and then take a boat across the lake to reach the island. The cabin was a single story, with only 2 bedrooms next to each other. The kitchen was connected to the living room, and there was a small bathroom in the back. Anywhere you slept in the cabin, there was always a window somewhere nearby, with no privacy curtains at all, so it was very easy to see outside into the forest and lake. And this is where my imagination would run wild, as I always thought someone was peering in on us at night. Of course, nobody ever was. I've been to this cabin a dozen times throughout my life, and nothing ever bad happened here. The older I got, the easier it was to sleep. Now for the event. We planned to spend 4 or 5 nights out there. It was on the 3rd night into our stay when we set up a campfire and had been drinking pretty much all night. I don't condone underage drinking, but we were a bunch of rebels back then. We made our way out to the dock to gaze up at the night sky and enjoy our buzz, when all of a sudden, we heard something splashing in the water. We quickly look out to the lake, wondering where the noise came from. Thankfully, the moon was out that night, which helped illuminate the lake. Otherwise, it would have been pitch black, as we were far from any streetlights or lampposts. Ryan spoke up. What the hell is that?" After looking closely and finally spotting what he was pointing at, I can only describe it as a head, just floating out in the lake, not on its side, but upright, staring directly at us. It was about the length of a football field away from the dock. There was no question that we could see it. It was there. I couldn't make out any facial features at that distance, just pale skin covered by long, black hair. I'll never forget that feeling that came over me. The hairs on my legs, neck, and arms stood up, and I was paralyzed on the inside. But we told ourselves it was just a loon, as they are very popular at this lake and do a lot of night hunting. They also have black and white colors on their coats, and they deep dive into the water, holding their breath for up to minutes at a time during their hunts. So it was possible that a loon had suddenly popped up in the water, or at least we tried to talk ourselves into that scenario. All of us noticed that the head wasn't moving at all, just treading water while remaining perfectly still. We went back to our campfire, threw some wood on it to make it even brighter, and eventually headed back inside to drink some more. I would like to mention that there was a staircase outside my friend's cabin, about 8 steps in length, down to the bottom where the fire pit was, and beyond that, the dock. We soon forgot about the floating head, with the help of the beer. That was until I had to use the restroom, and the one stall that we had inside was occupied. I just went outside to do my business. During the draining process, I was glancing out at the moonlit lake when I noticed that the head was still out there, but about 30 yards closer than before, still looking as if it was staring right at me. I could easily see the nose on this thing's face. It was clearly not a loon. A very uneasy feeling came over me, and I immediately went inside, told the others to come and look, never taking my eyes off of it while I stood in the cabin's doorway. Everyone else came outside to see it was still there, in the water. The head was now cocked up at us, with its chin in the air, looking at us. Nobody dared to go down to the dock anymore, and we immediately went back inside. The rest of the group also came to the same conclusion I had. It wasn't a loon. A bird wouldn't stay perfectly still like that in the water. This head-like object was as stiff as a coffin. It had been further away earlier and had moved closer,
but it was a beeline movement. Birds don't move like that either. There was no ripple effect at all from the object. I could tell that everyone else felt uneasy too. A few hours passed, and it was getting late. We knew that we had to get some sleep. Being curious, I looked outside one last time, and the object had vanished. I felt relieved, thinking it might have been a strange-looking log that must have floated off and hit shore somewhere. We slept with the windows open that night. There was no AC in the cabin, and it was the middle of the summer. Tommy and I were in the living room, while the other two were in separate bedrooms with their doors open. I had trouble falling asleep. I kept my eyes shut and heard someone walking at the bottom of the stairs near the campfire and dock. Pacing back and forth. Frozen in fear, I wanted to whisper to Tommy, but I couldn't. Suddenly, I heard the footsteps taking 2 steps up the stairs, then turned and sprinted down the path. After they faded and a couple of minutes passed, I woke Tommy, asking if he had heard it too. As we sat up, Ryan walked out of his room, saying that we needed to leave. Something disturbing in his expression prompted me to ask, "Why?" He didn't answer. He proceeded to wake up Kevin, shouting, "Everyone get your shit together and get in the boat. The hell is wrong with you?" I asked. While grabbing his stuff, Ryan explained. While tossing and turning in bed, he saw someone peering in the top right corner of his bedroom window. One eye, ghostly white skin, and long hair, before it shifted out of view. Looking back, it chills us to realize that, since it was up at the corner, this thing was either 8 feet tall or was somehow scaling the side of the cabin. "Come on, let's get the fuck out of here." Everyone just packed up and we bolted, not bothering to clean up the mess we made in the cabin. While locking up, we saw bare footprints in the dirt around the cabin and along the path. We hurried to the boat, threw our stuff in, untied it, and sped off. Not daring to look in the water, my eyes stayed glued to the island, but I saw nothing. After loading the car and tying up the boat, we drove off. 10 miles out, Ryan broke down sobbing. "What was that? What did I see?" We called our parents, explaining what happened, and that Ryan was freaking out. They told us to do our best to calm him down and to get home safely. It was around 4 or 5 a.m. at this point, and the rest of the ride back home was silent. Tommy's dad went up there the next weekend and experienced nothing, though he noted that he saw bare footprints like we did, which bothered him. Whatever Ryan saw hit him hard. He struggled to sleep for weeks afterward, needing medication, but he eventually recovered, though he avoids windows that have no curtains now. I can't explain what happened, what I saw in the lake, or what Ryan saw looking in at him. It could have been a prank gone wrong when Ryan spotted the figure, but the floating object in the lake remains a mystery. Its timing with the bare footprints and the window incident feels connected. Nothing has occurred at that cabin since, according to Tommy's dad, who I trust. Tommy and Kevin have been back there, but Ryan and I refuse to return, despite the fond childhood memories there.
There's always a reason to be afraid.